Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is season 2, episode 91. And I want to give a shout out, yo, Adrian, to listener Adrian H, our first ever Tears for Fears misheard song lyric. And the misheard lyric is, and when you take a dump, you're God. And the correct lyrics is, and when you're taken down, you're God. Pretty close. So, my friend's grandmother, when I was growing up, would always ask, have you had your BM today? Meaning bowel movement. And you and I know that if you haven't done one for a day or more than a day, things start to get stopped up inside. And once you're able to let it out, shout, I guess you do feel godlike. So this makes sense in a way, right? So thanks again for Adrian for this misheard song lyric suggestion. So let's talk about the song. Shout is a song by English pop rock band Tears for Fears. It was released as the second single from their second studio album called Songs from the Big Chair from 1985, released on November 19th, 1984. Roland Orzabal performs lead vocals on the track, and the single became the group's 6th UK top 40 hit, peaking at number 4 in January of 1985. How did it do in the US? Well, it reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 on August 3rd, 1985, and remained there for 3 weeks. Shout would become one of the most successful songs of 1985, eventually reaching number 1 in multiple countries. So, who's Tears for Fears? They are an English rock pop band formed in Bath, England back in 1981 by, I already mentioned his name, Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith. They were founded after the pretty much the breakup of their first band. It was called the Mod Influence Graduate. And then Tears for Fears were initially associated with the new wave synthesizer bands of the early 1980s. Later, the band branched out into more like a mainstream pop and attained international chart success, and boy, did they ever. They were part of the MTV-driven second British invasion of the US with the likes of Duran Duran, Human League, and Robert Palmer, just to name a few. Both Orzabal and Smith met as teenagers back in Bath, Somerset, England. And their professional debut came with the band Graduate, like I said, a mod revival new wave act. In 1980, Graduate released an album called Acting My Age and a single called Elvis Should Play Ska, referring to Elvis Costello, not Presley. So I like that distinction there. The single just missed the top 100 in UK, but performed well in Spain and Switzerland. Then the band split up in 1981, and shortly afterwards the duo became session musicians for the likes of another band called Neon, where they first met future Tears for Fears drummer Manny Elias. Neon also featured Pete Byrne and Rob Fisher, who went on to become Naked Eyes. Oh, I didn't know that. I love Naked Eyes. Always something there to remind me. And then Orzabal and Smith continued working together, drawing inspiration from artists such as Talking Heads, Peter Gabriel, and Brian Eno. Now, Orzabal developed a fondness for synthesizers as a big thing, or that's what they call the 1980s electronic explosion, in which the technology-based drummer-free approach of OMD, orchestral maneuvers in the dark, If You Leave, remember that song? And Depeche Mode, Hello, becoming the thing. And then I guess Gary Newman was also cited as an influence on Tears for Fears' new electronic direction. So they had a lot of influences at that time. And before they were Tears for Fears, they actually were named History of Headaches, which was soon changed to Tears for Fears. So the first Did You Know is the band was inspired by primal therapy. It was developed by an American psychologist named Arthur Janoff, which gained tremendous publicity after John Lennon from the Beatles became Janoff's patient in 1970. And apparently in a 2004 interview with VH1 UK, Orzabal and Smith said that when they finally met Janoff in the mid-1980s, they were kind of like, bummed out, let down to find he became quite, what they said, quote unquote, Hollywood, and wanted the band to write a musical for him. So it was like, bummer. They met the impetus of their song and ended up, not being as great as they thought it would be. And then as Tears for Fears, Orzabal and Smith intended to form the nucleus of the group and bringing in surrounded musicians to help them complete the picture. So around this time, they met local musician Ian Stanley, who offered them free use of his home 8-track studio. And then Stanley began working in the duo as their keyboard player, and after recording 2 demos, Tears for Fears was signed by Phonogram Records in the UK in 1981 by A&R manager Dave Bates. Their first single, Suffer the Children, produced by David Lord, was released on that label in November of 1981, followed by the first edition of Pale Shelter in March 82, but neither really was a success. The band achieved their first taste of success with their third single, Mad World, which reached number 3 in the UK charts back in November of 1982. And their first album, called The Hurting, was released back in March of 1983. And for this album, the next keyboardist and composer Ian Stanley and drummer Manny Elias were considered full bandmates at this time. Although we only know, and that's how I only know, that Smith and Orzabal were essentially, like they said, the front men and the face of the band. The band's debut album, The Hurting, 83, reached number 1 of the UK album chart. The second album, Songs from the Big Chair from 1985, reached number 1 on the US Billboard 200, achieving multi-platinum status in both UK and the US. So just to talk about that album, Songs from the Big Chair contained 2 Billboard Hot 100 number 1 hits, Shout, the one we're talking about today, and Everybody Wants to Rule the World. And the latter song won the Brit Award for the Best British Single in 1986. So 2 big songs from the Big Chair. And then after the release of their platinum-selling third album, The Seeds of Love, 1989, both Smith and Orzabal had a really harsh breakup in 1991. And Orzabal actually retained the Tears for Fears name as a solo project and released albums under the name Elemental in 1993 and Raul and the King of Spain in 1995. Then, thank goodness, Orzabal and Smith reconciled back in 2000 and released an album of new material, Everybody Loves a Happy Ending. That's what it's called, in 2004. And since then, the duo has toured consistently. So they came back and never, left each other's side. So a little bit more about the Shout background. So while Tears for Fears' previous single, Mother's Talk, had showcased a new, more extroverted songwriting style, Shout was completed with power chords, heavy percussion, and a synth-based solo and vocal sounding synth riff. Wow. The song even featured a lengthy guitar solo, something previously unheard of in any Tears for Fears usual music style. And then according to Roland Orzabal, he said, "The song was written in my front room on a small synthesizer and a drum machine. Initially, I only had the chorus, which was very repetitive, like a mantra. I played it to Ian Stanley, our keyboardist, and Chris Hughes, the producer. I saw it as a good album track, but they were convinced it would be a hit around the world." Chris Hughes from the Shout single sleeve notes stated, "We were halfway through recording Mother's Talk when Roland first played us a rough version of this new song he'd been working on. It was then very slow and very simple. I remember saying, this is so simple, it should take about 5 minutes to record. Well, weeks later, we were halfway through recording Shout when Roland had a birthday party. That evening, I asked the 4 of them separately if they had any thoughts about sleeve notes for the record. Roland said, white text on black paper, and say something about arguably the best offering yet. Kurt said, you're probably the best person to make up some of the off-wall, irrelevant drivel. Ian said, I don't like them. I'm not interested. Manny said, did you know I used to play drums for Rocky Ricketts and the Jet Pilots of Jive? So very interesting background on the song. But, what people want to know about is, what is the song about other than shouting, right? So what Roland said is, a lot of people think that Shout is just another song about primal scream theory containing the theme of the first album. It's actually more concerned with political protests. Came out in 1984 when a lot of people were still worried about the aftermath of the Cold War, and it was basically an encouragement to protest. That's what Roland said. His counterpart, Kurt Smith, said, it concerns protest in as much as it encourages people not to do things without actually questioning them. People act without thinking because it's just the way things do in society. So it's a general song, and about that way the public accepts any old grief which is thrown at them. And so interesting, because if you look at both of these quotes, they could be explaining what we're going through today in 2021. So just interesting that how many years later, 30-some years later, it still holds true. So a little about the music video, okay? The video, I always remember because it's both the faces of Roland Orzabal and Kurt Smith in a black and white. And they said the promotional video for Shout was actually filmed in late 84 and was the second Tears for Fears video directed by famed music video producer Nigel Dick. That was his name. It features footage of, like I said, Roland and Kurt Smith at Durdle Door in Dorset, England. That's a lot of D's. As well as the studio performance with the full band, including Ian Stanley and Manny Elias, performing the song amidst a crowd of family and friends. And it's so cute because when I watched the video just recently on YouTube, there's some little, youngins that are probably my age at that time that are like in their 40s now. And the video reportedly cost about £14 to make, which in 1984, roughly, that's about $19,800. And when you produce that in 2021 values, it would be about $51,000 in today's value. So interesting. Along with the clip for Everybody Wants to Rule the World, the Shout video had a big hand in helping establish Tears for Fears in America due to its heavy airplay rotation on the music video channel MTV, which I agree, it was like always on. The band had at one time considered making a second video for the song's American single release, as the original was not considered MTV friendly, but I disagree. That's an iconic one, especially their faces and them singing off of that cliff. So I learned so much. Thank you again for listener Adrian H for suggesting this. And, it's not about taking a dump, but, hopefully you do. Or like my friend's grandma would say, hopefully you had a BM today, because if you don't, you're going to be in trouble. If you have any great ideas like Adrian, please send it to our email address at misheard, that's MISSHEARD songs@gmail.com, or you can send it to us by way of our Twitter account. We can do it on Facebook as well as Instagram. We're everywhere, and we'd love to hear from you. So remember, keep singing those songs wrong. Bye!